I would really just like to, before I start my talk, say that this talk has taken me into a world. I've been working in the food policy department here at City for a long time. But when I started this research, it has taken me into a world that I did not know how to research. And this ties in with Patty's question. I think that in the world of food, in the food world, and these questions have kind of reinforced this for me, we don't understand how to unpack and unpick what it is that we're looking at. I wrote quite well on in my proceedings, I wrote a paper for myself called Company Law for Dummies, because, you know, corporations, companies, private equity, all of these things I had to learn about, and that's kind of one of the key lessons to myself from the research that I've been doing. Anyway, social sustainability. You're going to have to take it from me that sustainable development is I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea we provide for ourselves without destroying the resource base that our survival depends on. This photograph from 1968 was one of the ones that crystallized the idea that the Earth was a place of finite resources, and that economic development, which was busy raising people out of poverty, needed to confront environmental limits, and that there was a need for a new kind of development, which was sustainable development. And this intentionally unifying idea was instantly and unhelpfully, but ubiquitously, split into three aspects: environmental, social, and economic. I actually think that the economic's a bit of a red herring, and that we could safely talk about environmental and socio-economic. And my emphasis has been on looking at what socio-economic implications are for the food industry, or big food, as we've been talking about. But first of all, I just want to show you a little bit about how the social pillar has been construed. And the key thing to remember is that it's two things. First of all, it is attributes which people think are worth sustaining, such as equity or democracy. And it is also social processes. So it's not just about it's about both the what we want to sustain and the how we sustain it, the procedures by which we sustain it. This is an example of governance. That's what I would call governance, how problems are defined and then how you set about solving them. This is an example from Margis and Shin of quite a representative list of the sorts of things that have been adduced under the social pillar: human well-being, equity, democratic government, and democratic civil society. But this immediately highlights another important quality, which is that all of these lists are normative, that they're all about making choices. And more recently, this social idea has become much more sophisticated, and I think that Leach, Scones and Sterling is a good expression of this idea, that it is always a subjective framing, that even environmental aspects of sustainability have subjective underpinnings. They're about choices, they're about political choices, they have winners and losers, and we always have to bear that in mind. And just very quickly, my research, which is based on looking at company websites and interviews with people in food organizations, not just companies. I talk to all sorts, civil society, other actors. This presentation extrapolates to talk about companies. And so I'm really presenting what they are saying. I mean, I'll sneak in some of my own views, but really this is what they are saying. The key points that I want to make is that this is something that food companies are active on. We talked about what is a food company. I mean, I think there are many companies, not just companies that make and produce food, but data companies, logistics companies, consultancies, all sorts of companies which are instrumental which work on food, which don't actually produce edible things. And food companies are active on this. The definitions of sustainability and social sustainability are very fluid, and therefore, yes, they can be manipulated, and there's a lot of tactical defining goes on. But nevertheless, and this is a very important thing, and it's a bit really where I depart a bit from Tim Lobstein, who's always been one of my great heroes. I don't know whether he's still here. I admire his ability to say these are just baddies, and what they're doing is terrible, and what they are doing, as he depicts it, is terrible. But the people I've talked to in food companies, and you probably all experience this as well, are not bad people. They are people like me. They are people who think and read about this from morning till night. These are the sustainability practitioners in companies. And they are trying to do things about this. So where does this level of cynicism the impetus to do malign things, where does this happen in food companies? I think that's a really important question. Food companies are us, huge employers. We all eat what they produce. In the them and us spectrum, where's the line between them and us? I think there's another social thing it's worth bearing in mind. In terms of what they're doing about it, it's ad hoc to the point of being idiosyncratic and random. You don't get the impression that there's a kind of coordinated program of exploitation or self-enrichment, although both of those things obviously do occur. And the other thing is the structural complexity that we've talked about this morning, and the international scale, and the opacity of food companies, the difficulty of trying to find out how they're structured, who owns who, what names companies operate. These things are really hard to find out, really hard to find out. And this magnifies the challenges of social sustainability, of introducing coherent, humane, human rights respecting systems, and it also really obscures, makes difficult the task of scrutiny and audit. But the companies themselves also do find this difficult to implement. It's hard for them to make it governable. The sense is that they're kind of looking around, well, who can help us on this? The ILO's done something, okay, maybe we can have that. And other companies, let's collaborate. I don't know which author it was, I can't remember, who said that companies both compete and collaborate. You know, we see them, it's in their interests for us to perceive them as being very competitive, and they do compete, but maybe the things they're competing on are actually quite trivial. And the more fundamental things, they are busy collaborating on. And my own finding from a almost a governmentality perspective is that the people I talk to, and obviously the websites, they have a business rationality. They're doing the best they can within a business rationality, and I think that might be fundamentally incompatible with a sustainability rationality. And it may be that the sustainability rationality will win out in the end. Who knows? So I'm going to whiz from now on. These are some interpretations from the companies themselves of sustainability and social sustainability. So from Coca-Cola, not surprisingly, it lessens its impacts while continuing to grow. Grow is a very contentious term in sustainability terms. I was interested that the union man said unions have to grow, but companies are obsessed with growing, and as everybody who's read Tim Jackson knows, growth is very problematic. But here's a more thoughtful one from Young's, a seafood company, operating in a responsible way. This is social sustainability and corporate social responsibility often conflated. Meets the needs of people and business without compromising the needs of future generations. So that's a bit of a catch-all. But here's a very cynical view from a man who'd done everything in the food business. He was a real food businessman, a kind of executive. He said, oh yeah, that was a fashionable idea, and then we just got, we suggested it because we had to. And from a sustainability consultancy, as you'd expect, a more thoughtful definition, a socially sustainable supply chain where individuals at any point in that supply chain were conscious of each other, were alert to caring about other human beings at the point in the chain. So that's a very socially focused interpretation. Some laundry lists of attributes that from the companies themselves. Look, healthy eating, treating people fairly, responsible marketing. We saw what Tim had to say about that. Community engagement. Marks and Spencer's and Unilever are both famous for having very, very highly developed sustainability policies, defining sustainability policies really. So, nutrition, smallholder rights, women's livelihoods, they have thought of everything. Nourishing people is from Cargill, but actually I think it's General Mills, which has trademarked the phrase nourishing lives. They've got a little trademark after. But they have lots of, as you can imagine, I was very interested in what Tim had to say about the language, because one of the ways in which I think this is governed is through jargon. So a variety of definitions, and as I said, strategic designing. But how are they deciding what to do? This is a critical thing for me. They look around. This is something we've got to do something about. What are we going to do? So they look to high-level policy, and the UN has a lot of guidance and frameworks on this, the OECD. Trade associations, global trade associations, have got a lot of sort of formulas and frameworks and things for guidance. They appeal to their own values. Company values are very important. Sainsbury's talks about heritage values and Waitrose. I mean, the John Lewis documents on this are like a sustainability policy in themselves, really. I think their main objective of the company is the happiness of the partners in the company, the happiness and the well-being of the partners, part of which is the feeling that they work for a company with integrity, which is a kind of definition of company social sustainability, I'd say. But then the next thing is this thing about materiality. And materiality is a subject in itself. It's very relevant in CSR. There are materiality matrix specialists. There are materiality analysis, which is a service provided by sustainability consultancies, of which there are many. And it could be defined as what companies seeing as being relevant, potentially a risk to them, and something they can do something about. And this goes back to what is the proper business of business? Well, it's Milton Friedman famously said, the business of business is business, and it's actually anti-democratic of businesses to get involved in social policy, because who elected them? So they do try to do things that can be defended as being within their sphere of influence, but this leads quite directly to the charge of instrumentalism, that they're only serving their own interests. So they're in a bit of a cleft stick on that one, I would say. They do that by identifying groups of people, stakeholders, who they see as being legitimate kind of targets for action, the owners of the building, of the company, its employees, its customers, suppliers, so these different circles of people that you can get involved with. This is expressed in different ways. Dairy Crest says environment, marketplace, workplace, community. Warburton's, which is a family business, a private company, stresses its family values. So it says, well, we have a family of owners, a family of employees, and the families we feed. And Coca-Cola, once again, me, that's the employee. Me, I guess, is the product. We is the family of employees, and world is the rest of the world that we can have an impact on.
Is there a comma between we? Is it me, comma, we?
Yes,
comma?
me, world, I beg your pardon, yes. Me, we,
so it's
world.
me, world, we, world.
No, it's me, comma, we,
me.
comma, world. Me, we, world. And another thing that they do is they outsource it completely. This is a big thing we've got to think about, but we've got somebody else to think about it. So they outsource it to consultancies, mainly, and consultancies outsource to other consultancies, and civil society, which I'm sorry, I shouldn't be talking about, also outsources. So there's a great kind of cross-referencing of people doing research for other people, and you look at a report that you think, DEFRA, for example, got a report done by a consultancy by Two Tomorrows, but I think Two Tomorrows actually outsourced the research to an organization called SOMO in the Netherlands. And, so there is kind of chains of distancing responsibility in a way going on. And again, they collaborate, they form alliances with each other, partnerships. So what do they do once they've decided who they're going to be affected? Well, in the workplace, we want to be a great place to work. They want to. I would digress to say that Doris Fuchs, who's a very good commentator on corporate power, talks about instrumental power, which is the power that companies exert just by saying, look, government, you better take notice of us because we employ loads of people, and also by helping to write the rules. And she talks about instrumental. One of the key ones is discursive power, which is what we've been talking about today. The idea of structural power is the other one, and discursive power. So providing employment, I guess this is kind of structural power. Anyway, we won't get into kinds of power. It's interesting to remember that. But a key way in which companies think that they address their social concerns is that they see themselves as employers. They see them and they pay attention to the viability of their future workforce. People don't want to go to work in the food industry or in agriculture. This is a big source of anxiety. They try to do this. They provide apprenticeships. They tell the government it should educate people differently in order that they'd be better sort of fodder for the food industry and all that sort of thing. In the marketplace, this is where nutrition, which many people in the room probably would see as a central social concern of the food supply, it's not so central actually in the company websites, and it's couched in this terms of the nutritional profile of food reformulation. They remake their processed foods to conform with nutritional guidelines. So they take salt out, or they take hydrogenated fat out, or this, that, and the other. They also are concerned with affordability if they produce affordable food. So McDonald's, Asda, they say social sustainability is about affordability and healthiness of food. Supply chains, well, responsible sourcing, labour rights along supply chains, capacity building, helping people to meet standards. That's what that's really about. There's a big difference between in the way that they conceptualise their relations with workers, distant workers, and workers in the UK. And communities, well, all sorts of challenge, volunteering, support for local communities and whatnot, which you might think is trivial, and it certainly sometimes seems to be very arbitrary, but it's very significant. I mean, Cargill has given £500,000 in the last few years to Crisis Fair Share in the Northwest, which is a significant amount of money in the UK, around Liverpool, which I guess is where Cargill had its ports origin, yeah. The trail of materiality leads to some weird and wonderful places. Twining's Ovaltine supports for tea communities, okay. Cargill is interesting. Sorry, I seem to be obsessed with Cargill, I don't know why. The Flour Fortification Initiative and Food Solutions are two very interesting developments because they are both initiatives to promote food processing, the food industry, the methods of the industrial food supply, if you will, in the developing world. So it's a form of outreach. They're improving food processing facilities. It's what Tim Lofstein said. It's economic development, but we have to kind of think, well, what else is it as well? But who's to judge in the end? This is the program Coca-Cola. This is what Tim was talking about. 5 million female entrepreneurs by 2020. This is material because they're women who potentially could be connected to the company value chain. They did a lot of research and discovered that women already are not just consumers of their beverages, but also often run the small kiosks where their beverages are sold. So they thought they could expand on this by, for example, solar-powered beverage coolers and the various bicycles and whatnot that Tim had in his pictures. And one of my favorites, which I couldn't resist putting in, the Utterly Butterly Ukulele Orchestra, a project to give children, can you see, I don't know whether you can see at the back, but it's a project to give children the chance to learn musical instruments by making ukuleles from empty Utterly Butterly tubs. And since the program was introduced, which was only a few years ago, 70,000 children have accessed it. So again, you think, what a load of rubbish, but actually, they have a very huge impact in some ways. The other thing they do is they self-regulate, or they regulate each other, or they accept quasi-regulation from external organizations such as multi-stakeholder initiatives, of which there are many proliferating, sometimes called public-private partnerships. But examples would be the Fair Trade Foundation, for example, which is a huge external governance system which companies agree to be regulated by. There are many, many codes. They've got, company codes of conduct. The ETI, the Ethical Trading Initiative Codes of Conduct, is on labour rights. Is there an ETI person here? Oh, I thought you were smiling knowingly. Many companies say, oh yes, we observe the ETI. There are standards such as Global Gap GRASP, which is an optional social add-on to the Global Gap technical standard for produce. So you have to meet the Global Gap standard for your produce to be accepted by retailers using that system. But the social add-on, which is about labour rights, I think there might be some community benefits, is optional. It doesn't actually count towards your score. And social elements often do still have that status. They're kind of seen as optional extras. But the Global Reporting Initiative absolutely puts the social concerns foursquare in the middle. So with the Sustainable Agriculture Network Standard, that has a social component.
Does everyone know these things, GRI?
Global Reporting Initiative that's a different approach. It's not a production standard, it's a reporting standard. It's about how companies report their performance, their non-financial performance as well as their financial performance. So that's a different approach. SA 8000 is a standard for labour rights along supply chains. It's been around for a long time. Platforms, these are usually collaborative. The Fruit Juice CSR platform has just come into being. It was seed funded by the EU. It's now been taken on by the EU fruit juice, the EU-level fruit juice trade association, and that is about labor, basically about labor rights in supply chains. And SEDEX is the big information sharing platform that retailers use to check social, to check whether their supply companies have met social criteria. Roadmaps. I've put the UK soft drinks roadmap in there because, although obviously soft drinks use what are called high-risk supply chains, i.e. they will use sugar, for example, and also because soft drinks have been implicated in obesity, so you think that would be another big social concern. The UK soft drinks roadmap does not mention any social criteria at all. It is entirely about environmental criteria. But Sainsbury's 20 by 20, Unilever Sustainable Living, and the Marks and Spencer's Plan A, these are huge corporate sustainability programs which are very comprehensive and do contain the social elements that I've been interested in. And of course, contracts are a big way by which companies police this activity because they specify that companies will have had to comply with them. And the other thing, the discursive power element, is they talk and they publish about all of this. They publish reports, they have websites, which I've been looking at, and they try to they try to shape what's being said. Oh, and the other thing, of course, is the ranking and rating. So Oxfam's behind the brands, rates companies. The Access to Nutrition Foundation, which is the legacy of your work, which has been hived off from GAIN, is another thing that ranks companies on their performance. But of course, as you say, it is very much emanates from the kind of corporate sphere, and therefore, although challenging, it is quite challenging, I think. It is kind of corporation friendly, but then Oxfam's is quite corporation friendly as well, in that it. But then, it's the carrot and stick thing, isn't it? Covalence Ethical Quote is a different kind of thing. That is a company which, like FTSE for Good or others, rates companies on their what's often called ESG, environmental, social, and governance performance, to advise investors. It's a tool for encouraging better social performance by ranking companies so that investors can choose or not to invest or not to invest. So that's another way in. And Covalence Ethical Quote has a very, very detailed set of criteria. If you were looking for that sort of thing, that is very good. This is a very dense slide. I'm not going to read it out. This is just to try to exemplify what I've been talking about. Moy Park, you may not have heard of Moy Park, but unless you are St. Peter, you've probably eaten some of their products, because one of the interesting things that they do is they produce everything from value for money coated nuggets to Jamie Oliver's high welfare, organic, this, that, and the other. All of these niches they produce from. They have many, yes, it's a poultry company, and they have hatcheries, they have feed mills, they have farms, and they have slaughtering companies, which they call processing companies, and packaging companies. So they do the lot. It's vertically integrated. Many, I think it's Northern Ireland's largest company, and it has these outposts throughout the UK and throughout Northern Europe. But it is owned by a Brazilian multinational called Marfrig, which is gigantic. It's actually owned via an American protein company, which is owned by Marfrig. Marfrig is one of Brazil's largest food companies and produces and sells food in hundreds of companies around the world. It is gigantic. So here we have companies with different levels of accountability. Moy itself consists of many different companies with different names, doing different things, and you would be very hard pushed by looking at the websites of those companies to know which ones were connected with which ones. And they've all got different statements about what their responsibilities are, about which schemes they work with, all the rest of it. But Moy says it wants to make a positive impact on society and the environment, and it stresses localism. So you have a gigantic company, part of an even bigger company, but almost perversely or deliberately, it says we use local sourcing to achieve it stresses locally based operations. It uses, how does it operationalize its social responsibilities? Well, it uses these off the peg schemes. As I say, it outsources it. It says we use Red Tractor, Soil Association, the Prince's Countryside Fund, and Business in the Community. We turn to them, they endorse our activities. It counts things. These are the sorts of things it counts. So it counts the number of school pupils receiving careers education, total hours of employee training, employee volunteer hours, and score in employee satisfaction surveys. They are not untypical. This is how companies assess whether they are doing well. They look for things to measure. How are we going to do this? We've got to count something. What are we going to count? So then they count things. I already said it's hard to follow the chains to the linked companies, and they've all got different policies. But then Marfrig, back in Brazil, has a kind of different sustainability strategy, which is about the creation of value over the long term. But it does have a 6-pillared policy in which the social pillar is conceived as social responsibility, diversity, health, and safety. And to just take up the materiality thread again, it operationalizes its social responsibilities by forming a partnership with Ronald McDonald, which is itself the philanthropic wing of McDonald's. But of course, you can see the beef connection. It makes donations, for example, and this would be very surprising in this country, wouldn't it? 15,000 tons of beef a year to a cancer hospital, and helping employees to achieve home ownership. That's back in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, I think, which is not something I've ever encountered in a social sustainability policy in this country. So there is great diversity. And the point here is that the policy is incoherent. And it's very difficult for it to be coherent. There are different types of activity, different product ranges, different approaches, different territories. It's hard to align their policies. And the lack of transparency makes it very difficult to scrutinize any of this. And Tata Tea would be another good example. Tata Global Beverages, which owns Tetley's Tea, they are trying to have policies which align not just a company which operates in India and Britain and other countries, very different kind of social laws and values, but also policies that apply to steel and tea bags. This complexity, these kind of Hydra-like entities are really difficult to govern. Okay, so this is how hard it is. Yes, it's hard for them to do it. It's hard for Global Gap Grasp has 16 sets of national interpretation guidelines because there's so much cultural variation. It's hard to score. I won't read these things out. You can see on the, you can read it. They're hard to audit. There's a huge effort and cost. Doing a corporate responsibility index report, one interviewee told me, he said it was a month's work, and that was a big company with a lot of people feeding into it. It was a month's work. The corporate complexity I've talked about. It's hard to engage the staff. They go to great lengths. And I would say they've been relatively successful, actually, engaging their own staff to come on board with these things. And finally, is there a business case? And that brings me to my last point, really. They're always working within this business constraint. You can't take your eye off your numbers. It's in my genes. If it doesn't make business sense, I know I won't get anywhere. It's not the norm for buyers to take these things into account. They're still worried about their numbers. And this thing, which more than one interviewer said to me in some version, at the end of the day, we're a business. We do what we can, but at the end of the day, we're a business. So which brings me to these final thoughts which I've had, really. This is, I don't know whether you can read it, but this is, I would say, the sustainability rationality for looking at food corporations. And these are, there are inputs and there are outputs. And in the red letters, it's us worrying about all of them. Everything that goes in and everything that goes out. And people in the companies worrying about these as well. So we regulate them, we have standards, codes, specifications, names and shames. Is it legal? Is it healthy? Is it affordable? Is there too much of it? Is there not enough of it? All of this is going on, very complex. But there's another way of looking at food corporations, which is much simpler. And this is reductive, but it's not completely absurd. And it's just like that. You put your money in, so these companies, Blackstone,
3G.
ABF, but not just them, Associated British Foods, well, it's got food, it makes food, but it makes enzymes, it, sells frocks. They do all sorts of things. How much do you have to spend? Everything we worry about really is in the cost arrow in a way, and then you get return on investment. So I'll leave you with that. I've already said that.